Thank you again for joining us for the Ntrepid webinar, How You're Losing Sensitive Business Secrets Through Passive Information Leakage. And doing our presentation today is the Chief Scientist for Passages, Lance Cottrell. Lance, over to you.
Hi, thanks very much. I really appreciate all of you tuning in for this. Wanted to start off real quick with a quick poll, get a sense of how many of you are interested or concerned about this issue of competitors being able to access your sensitive business secrets. And obviously an awful lot of internet security and computer security is focused around protecting the sensitive information that we have and making sure that the information that we have it stays proprietary and that we keep control of it and can control who has access to it, who gets aware of those kinds of things. And it looks like pretty much all of you are. There's a whole technology called data loss prevention, which focuses on this problem. It's how do you keep the data inside your network from making its way out? And this is separate from the problem of keeping intruders out of your network, but how do you keep that data from escaping? So you've got credit card numbers, you've got patient information, you've got mergers and acquisition plans, whatever those crown jewels are in your business, you're always concerned about, will those go out? And so with conventional data loss protection systems, what you're doing is normally scanning all of the traffic going out of the network. And you're looking for what of your secrets might be in that. Is there a document that contains credit card numbers? Are there documents with known names or watermarks or that have been tagged as sensitive information? And if you see that, unhappy bit of data, then the data loss prevention tool can intercept it and prevent the upload or prevent sending it out to a web page or things like that. And that can be fairly effective when the kind of information that's going out is in a file or is in a known format, like a credit card number or a social security number. But there's a whole lot of ways that data can get out of your network and cause problems that aren't in this kind of form. And the one I want to talk about today is behavioral. And the problem is the internet knows about your interests, and we'll put that in quotes, but when you go out and engage on the internet, you reveal information about what you're interested in, whether it's wholesome, whether it's related to your business practices. Your interests and plans affect how you use the internet, where you go, what pages you look at. And that information is visible to every website you're going to. They can see, he's spending a lot of time focusing on this kind of page, on this kind of data. And we call that passive information leakage. No files are actually leaving your network. There's not a document that contains the secret, yet the information encoded in the way you use the internet is making it out there. And so that's why it fails. Passive information leakage can't see it because these are ordinary web searches. It's someone just going and clicking on a link. It's using Google. It's going and visiting your competitor's website. You never uploaded any secrets. So the data loss prevention tools think that that looks like perfectly innocuous, normal internet data to them. That's happy data. Let that go through. But still, you're revealing that information about yourself, about your activity, about your plans to the sites that you're going out to. So I want to take a quick step back and talk about why I got interested in this kind of data loss. And it's because I've spent the last 20 years building internet stealth technologies and trying to create tools that would allow users, consumers, businesses, law enforcement to work on the internet in a way that they wouldn't be tracked, they couldn't be identified. And so we built all kinds of different tools for this. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what goes wrong. How do people get exposed? How do they reveal information about themselves when they're trying to engage with the public internet? And the reality is that anonymity is really hard on the internet. In the real world, it's fairly straightforward as long as you're paying cash. You're probably transactionally anonymous most places you go. I mean, maybe there's a license plate scanner somewhere, but on the whole, what you're doing in the real world can be fairly easily made anonymous. But online, everything is tracked all the time, everywhere. Right? Every website you go to, every transaction you make on the internet is being logged by someone. And it's going into a database, and it's searchable, and it's retrievable, and it can be analyzed after the fact. And so if you just try to go into a website and you're trying to be anonymous, they're going to get who were you, your cookies, your IP address, right? All this other kinds of data about you. And it makes it a really hard problem when you're trying to stay under the radar. And so this can break down in a number of different ways. Obviously, you can get cookied, and if you don't delete the cookies and they know, that's tied to an identity, then you've already sort of lost. If you've got a known IP address, they can track you that way. They can use traceroute and other network analytics and look at, what ISP are you at, what business are you at. They can look at the history of sites you visited, because that can often tell an awful lot about your activity. Famously, someone did a research study on a accidentally released huge trove of AOL search results many years ago, and they found that just by looking at people's search queries, they could individually identify them based on the kinds of things they asked about, the kind of conditions they might look at, kind of schools, whether they're looking about retirement or daycare. And you put all that together, and they were actually able to call individuals and say, is this you? And in fact, get confirmation that it was. Your system has a unique fingerprint. I'm going to talk more about that, but it's very easy to track computers and devices. Human error, I'm going to come back to this one a lot because human error is the most common way things break down. But what got me thinking about this problem of passive information leakage was behavior revealing who someone was or where they were. And this is one I really didn't expect when I started many years ago. And what turned me on to it was Google. So we had a customer, and they were in the United States, and they had a big office full of people. And they wanted to look like they were coming out of a foreign country. We'll call it Elbonia. So they were trying to come out of Elbonia. So we set up a point of presence in Elbonia and routed all their traffic through our systems to come out of Elbonia, because that's what we do. And this was working great for a while. And then we get a call from this customer, and they say, hey, Google knows that we're in the United States. In fact, they knew exactly where they were in the United States. And we said, well, that doesn't make sense. And they go, it's your fault. You've screwed up. There's a problem with your system. And we spent a lot of time tracking it down. The IP address was really coming from Elbonia. It was on servers registered to Elbonia. The DNS information said Elbonia. All the analytics we could run said Elbonia. And so we began to dig deeper. And it turned out what was happening was that these customers of ours were using our system not just for their official research, but they were also using it casually. And so they'd Google where they wanted to go to lunch. They'd look up a map for their doctor's appointment, or to go get a haircut, or look at where some store was at nearby. And over time, this behavior built up. People tend to search for things near where they are. So what Google is doing is it looks at the behavior of the people on average over time and says the center of their average locations of the places they search is probably where they are. And it turns out to be phenomenally accurate. And I think no one else ever really realized Google was doing this, because if Google tells you that you are where you really are, that's hardly surprising. But we'd gone to so much trouble to make everyone think that they were in Elbonia when they suddenly showed up being in the city they were actually in the United States. We took the trouble to uncover it, and we were able to prove this because we could feed them fake information and huge numbers of fake queries and make Google think kind of whatever we wanted. But then I said, wait a minute, Google's doing this, and I know about it because they reflect it back in their default search results. If you type in restaurants or Italian restaurant, it'll show you Italian restaurants near you. But every website has access to all this kind of behavioral information that people are engaging in. They just may not reflect it back to you in a way that you can see it. You may never be aware that they were gathering this kind of information about your activities, where you went, what you were looking at all the time. And so the problem is this is visible to a whole lot of different websites. So let's say you're typical, you visit maybe 10 to 20 different websites in a day. Well, I did a quick check using one of these tools. It'll show you all the details of your network traffic. And when I went to the CNN homepage, it showed that I made connections to 47 different third-party websites on just hitting one page one time. And all of those people would be able to see I was at CNN at that moment looking at this particular page. And as I click along, they're going to get information. How long did I spend on each page? What articles did I dig in deeply to? Which ones did I quickly click along from? And so that raises the problem because what you're doing drives where you visit. So the kind of activities you're involved in day to day really determine which pages you go to, what articles you read. Are you interested in this topic? Are you interested in this country? Are you interested in this technology? That's going to be reflected in your surfing patterns and visible to the websites you go to. So let's look at this in a more down-to-earth way and see where the rubber meets the road. So how does passive information leakage actually impact you? What kind of damage is this really going to do to you in the real world? And rather than trying to make up an example or put someone else in a tough spot, let's look at my behaviors and what my information and activities do to reveal what I'm up to and to put me at a disadvantage. So first off, I'm an active angel investor. So I'm always talking to new startups, thinking about, what are they up to? What are their possibilities? What kind of things are they creating? And do I want to invest in that company? And so I'm looking at all kinds of different companies, and I might just go check out their webpage real quick, or I might go there, look at the page, and then I'll come back and look at the management team, and I'll come back and look at the advisors, and I'll come back and maybe sign up for a trial of the service that they've created. And I'll come back again and look through their white papers, come back again, look through their media information, right? I'm now establishing this pattern. I'm coming back a lot. It's again and again, and I'm spending time there and I'm reading the information. Now, if this company is smart, they've tacked some analytics onto their website so they can tell it's me, and they can tell just how long I'm spending on this website. And so if I go and hit them once and then disappear, it's a pretty sure thing I'm not all that interested in them. And so I've got a good negotiating position, right? I'm happy to walk away. By the time the 30th or 40th time I visited this website, and I've now got several hours spent reading all of their materials, they know I'm a fish on the hook, right? I'm excited. I'm already going to be really interested in the company. So next time we have a conversation, even if I'm trying to play it cool, I'm going to try to pretend that there's nothing, that special about this deal. I'm not really that passionate about it. They know better, and they're really going to hold out for much tougher terms than they might if they thought that I was disinterested and they need to really sweeten the pot to get me on board. So this could cost me real money in the investments that I'm making. So the other thing I'm involved with is, among other things, R&D for Ntrepid, right? As chief scientist, I've got my fingers in an awful lot of our pies. We're creating new products. We've focused on all sorts of different technologies over the years. Right now, we're launching a new product. It's a secure web browser. And so over the last several months, I've been thinking a lot about that. And so where do I go? Well, I'm looking at articles about secure web browsing. I'm looking at other companies that may be involved in the area. There's a handful of competitors that are already doing things in that space. I'm spending a lot of my time looking at what kind of technologies do they have? How did they build this? What problems have they run into? What kind of customer feedback are they getting on their support pages? That was what I was looking at as we were thinking about how to architect this solution. Then, as you're getting closer to actually launching the tool, within the last couple of months, I would be looking more at their marketing pages, their PR. How do they describe it? What words do they use? What kind of value propositions are they talking about? And so if they're watching my activity over time, they'd see that evolution from more technological focus and white papers to more marketing and PR focused. Now they can even time what product I'm going to release and when I'm likely to release it, just based on the evolving patterns of activity that I'm leaving on these companies' websites. And now that we've been launched for a while, we're watching other companies come in and they're hitting our website, and we can see them come in and visit, and then we can later see their websites change to in fact reflect some of the wording and value propositions and ways of talking about the threat models that we use are starting to show up on their websites. And we would know ahead of time that that was likely to happen based on who's visiting our website, with what intensity they're hitting it. So let's drill down a little. How does passive information leakage actually work? How does a website try to do this to you? Right? If one of your competitors wants to learn about you, what do they need to do? And the interesting thing is it is fully self-contained just on their website. So with passive information leakage, your competitor doesn't need to do anything to you. They just need to sit back and watch what you do when you interact with them. So the first stage is they need to identify you. It's a target acquired kind of thing. If you're just some random person visiting their website, that contains very little information. Without knowing who you are, they can't draw any really useful conclusions. It's not useful data, at least for the purposes of gathering passively leaked information. So they want to work out who's coming to the website and lock on. And there's a number of ways they can do that. One of the easiest will be from the IP address. So if your IP address, you're at work and your work IPs are registered to your company, they've got you. Reverse DNS or Whois may tag you immediately. But in many cases, reverse DNS may not resolve to anything useful. The Whois information might just come back to say a mobile account. So it can be a useful tool for them to do this, but it's not a be-all and end-all, especially at the identification stage. The most effective that I've seen is what I call solicited identification. So the website's going to be asking you, who are you? And they'll do this in a lot of ways. For example, if you want to sign up for a webinar like this one, we asked for your information, your email address, your name, the company you work for. And we can capture that, we can cookie you, we can grab IP addresses, lots of stuff that can be done at that point. You see the same thing for downloading white papers or signing up for newsletters. Every opportunity a website can, it'll try to get you to give your identifying information to the website, which they can then use to say, okay, now I've got this person identified, I've got target lock, and I can try to watch them going forward. There's even some more aggressive techniques that we've seen people using. So for example, you can set up a social media link that's only shown to your target person that they're likely to click on. When they click on it, you know that that hit came from the person of interest, and you can then identify that identified individual with their IP address. You can cookie them, you can do whatever else you need to do. You can effectively do the same thing with a phishing email, without sending malware, but you can send a link that will be enticing to the person, and when they click on it, you know who you emailed, you had a unique identifier in the email, and you can acquire their information that way. If you're looking at entire corporations, you can often social engineer the company for the IP blocks. So even if they're not overtly listed, they're not registered to the company, if you call up and say, we're going to be doing a demo at your company, and we're really interested in making sure that the service we're going to demo works, can you tell me what your IP space is so I can unblock it from our firewalls, since this product's still not publicly released? It looks like you're trying to open yourself up to them. They're very likely to provide the information that you need. And then, of course, now you know their IP space, you can go ahead and do what you need. You can even bug emails, put a little HTML bug in the email that changes for every single email you send. It's really easy to automate. And every time someone views one of your emails, it's providing that information that allows you to identify the person with their web activity. So now the website has identified you. It needs to track you over time. It's really important that they be able to see that pattern of activity build up, because just one hit doesn't provide a great deal of information. There's all kinds of websites I might visit once just out of vague curiosity, but it doesn't provide too much information about my behavior. So they're going to want to watch me over a period of time. They need to then make sure they can track me not just when they first acquired that information, but on an ongoing basis. Here's where the IP address is more effective. If you've got broadband at home or you're coming out of an office environment, that IP address is probably static. And so it's the easiest thing for them to track. Absolutely every connection gets an IP address. And it's the most difficult thing to change about your computer because you can't really do it yourself. You're always coming out of your own network. You need to get some remote point that you can bounce off. And that's where privacy services, VPNs, maybe renting a server in a cloud service will come in useful. But in general, this is the number one way of tracking you if you're trying to delete your cookies. Now, of course, most people don't bother even deleting their cookies or super cookies, which are much harder to delete, other techniques for leaving trackers on your computer. But websites are always going to be doing this. This is the lowest hanging fruit out there. So if they can get a cookie onto your system, now you're volunteering who you are every time you revisit the page, and it makes the collection of data about you as simple as possible. And I said I was going to come back to browser fingerprinting because it's a really interesting one. It turns out that your web browser's configuration, which is visible to the websites you're visiting, is practically unique in the world. And certainly for small to medium-sized websites, you are probably the only person to have ever visited the website with that particular set of configurations. And when we think about web browser configurations, we're often thinking about the simple HTTP headers. So, what version of the browser are you running? What kind of browser, right? It's Firefox. It's this particular release version, and your operating system is a Mac, Windows, Linux, and what particular release. That's not all that unique. But it turns out there's a lot more information that comes out. They can see things like, what's the screen resolution? What time zone are you in? What keyboard do you have? What language preferences do you have? All right, so that's a few more bits of information. But then there's all the plugins that you have installed. And after you've been using a computer for a while, you often get quite a lot of different kinds of plugins, either that you installed intentionally or that some other software stuck into the browser for you. And then there's the fonts that you install, again, from all kinds of sources that may be sticking these fonts onto your computer. And it turns out that the way your browser reports it back is generally reflective of the order and way in which they were installed. So that starts to contain a lot of information. And in fact, last time I visited it using my Mac, it found 18 to 19 bits of entropy just from that browser configuration, which made me unique to about 1 in 300,000 users. Now, I've used other computers. I've seen it as high as 22 bits, which makes it unique between me and 4.3 million other tested users. But there's other ways of tracking as well. It turns out that your hardware provides information. So I can do what's called canvas fingerprinting, where I put up a very high resolution vector image and then capture how it gets rendered. And that turns out to be specific to the chipsets in your video processor and the versions of firmware on those chipsets and how it interacts with your operating system. And that provides on average another 5 to 7 bits of information. And so all told, we're now talking one among many, many, many millions of users to a given website. So if they've got the fingerprint of your browser, even if you delete everything else about it, they're going to be able to recognize when you come back and reacquire, re-cookie, retrack each time you visit. And there have been some academic articles on this. It turns out that this is redundant enough that they can even track you as you add new fonts and new browser plugins because the changes are small compared to the level of accuracy of identification, and they just need to update their records as you shift from thing to thing. And this is not some theoretical academic project. There's actually major advertising companies on the internet already using this for reacquiring people who change their IP address and delete their cookies, making sure that they can re-identify them to maintain the accuracy of their advertising targeting. Okay, so now you've been identified and the website is successfully tracking you every time you visit the site. Now they want to look at the patterns because the patterns are where the information is. Right? This is where the actual passive information leakage happens, is when you identify and analyze the information over time. So let's take a look at an example here. Imagine that you're working at Black Mesa, and I love this example because I'm a a portal geek. And you want to go look at Aperture Laboratories, and they've got a number of different areas that they're focused on. So they make portal guns, and they have artificial intelligence systems, and they make this strange set of gels, and they've got these robotic machine gun turrets. And those are all different sort of business lines that Aperture is involved with. And you may be much more interested in one of these than another at different times. So as someone working at Black Mesa, they know you're a competitor, so they've analyzed Black Mesa's business model fairly carefully. So they know you've got several major divisions. You have a weapons R&D group, a biologics lab, a marketing group, and you've got the executive team. And so they're going to look at how active are each of those groups in looking at all the sections of the Aperture Lab's own website. So there's a section for their R&D lab. They've got a section of the website focused on their portal guns, on the turrets, on their AI, and on those special gels. And they see some things standing out when they do this analytics. They notice that the executive team at Black Mesa is really interested in the lab stuff. And that's maybe not surprising. That's probably a consistent data point because usually the executives are trying to do strategic stuff. They're looking at the long view of what the laboratory is trying to do because that'll be the products of the future. At least you hope that's what your executives are up to. But more interestingly, we see the marketing group is very interested in the gun turrets. And like I said before, who's interested can actually tell you when things are going to happen. In fact, if we look up, one of the other active areas was the weapons R&D group is also interested in turrets. And perhaps if we looked at this historically, we'd see they were really interested in the turrets 6 months ago. Now it's the marketing group. So Aperture Labs can make an educated guess that Black Mesa is going to be releasing a new competitive automated artificially intelligent gun turret sometime in the next weeks to months because they're really starting to ramp up the marketing side of their business. And that's valuable intelligence, right? Now they can take it and put out new press releases. They can try to, take the air out of the room or undercut their competitors based on this prior knowledge of what Black Mesa certainly considers highly confidential and proprietary information. All right, so let's talk about how do you protect yourself against this kind of thing? How do you make sure that you're not being tracked, that you're not revealing this kind of information? And the key is to break the patterns. Make sure they can't get that data about you. And there's an old saying, once is chance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. If I just hit a website once, it really has very little informational value for it. If I go there twice, that indicates some interest, but 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 times that you're visiting a website, now you're providing a huge amount of information about your level of interest and focus of interest on that website. So making sure they can't get that is the key to preventing the passive information leakage. It also matters who you're working against, because obviously there's a huge range of levels of focus on this problem. Some customers are going to be way more sophisticated technically. Some of them are going to be, the websites you visit rather, maybe much more aggressive. We tend to see these correlating. So more sophisticated companies will have more sophisticated analytics. They'll be more aggressive in trying to track who's coming to visit them. And so understanding who you're worried about really feeds back into the kinds of precautions you need to take. Because obviously this is always, like all security, a business decision. And you can, at the end of the day, spend infinite money and effectively infinitely inconvenience yourself for infinite protection, but that may be totally disproportionate to the actual risk you're suffering. So let's look at basic typical tracking. So this would be ordinary websites, ordinary advertisers, and they're using typical analytics. So they're automatically, obviously, capturing your IP address all the time. They're going to be cookieing you, and they've got a whole range of standard analytic platforms, least of which really would be Google Analytics. But obviously, there's far more sophisticated log analytics tools for allowing you to track how did people come into the website, what's their demographics, what did they look at, how did they move through it. And so a company that's not really even trying to implement a passive information leakage attack may be gathering this kind of information just through their ordinary web analytics kinds of activities. But they're not being too aggressive, so protecting yourself is not all that difficult. The first step is delete the cookies, because that's the main tracker that people are using. uh, when they're looking at who you are and where you're going. I recommend enabling the incognito or private browsing mode in your browser. That makes sure that any cookies that you pick up get deleted at the end of the session so that you can use the website. Obviously, many websites break if you don't have these things enabled, but they can't then recognize you when you come back tomorrow. It's also important to make sure that you're coming in from non-overt IP addresses. So if your corporate network is registered to mycompany.com, then that's awfully easy for them to see. You probably want to avoid using that network. But if your company's IP space is registered to your ISP, it's registered to Verizon, or it's registered to your upstream provider, then that's probably good enough against this casual kind of opponent. But the next level up is a motivated competitor. So now you're going against someone who knows who they're looking for, right? This would be the Aperture Labs example. They know that Black Mesa is their main competitor. We know who our main competitors are. You probably have a good sense of who the top 5 or 6 people in your space are that are in the similar areas, releasing similar kind of products. And so you can easily set up your systems to look for those people, to identify those visitors. Um, you've taken the effort to discover the IP space of that corporation, even if it isn't overtly registered, either through social engineering or sending bugged emails or what have you. You've discovered that pretty well. You may know their home IP addresses by this point. You're using that to cookie and re-cookie. So if someone comes in without cookies, you're reapplying your trackers based on the other information you've got. You might even be using some simple super cookies or tracking historical behavior by looking at history and previously visited web pages. And they're starting to employ more sophisticated pattern analysis. They're not just using Google Analytics. They may be using some off-the-shelf sophisticated analytics, or they may have in fact written some of their own scripts to go through these log files, go through the data that they've got, and extract that behavioral information about you. So the defense here, in addition to the incognito mode, you want to make sure that you're using IP addresses that are not related to your house or your business. So that could be using 3G, using a wireless connection, or going to a Starbucks, or any kind of public Wi-Fi network would work fine for this. Just making sure that it is something that is broadly shared by people who are not you, and it's not easily attributable back to your network. That can be very effective. You may at this point also want to be disabling Java, Flash, ActiveX, Silverlight, because those are the tools that are used for those, particularly the simple super cookie kind of approaches that can allow them to reacquire you, even if you're using different, if you wiped your cookies and you're using different IP addresses. So turning off that active content can make it more difficult to track you. It can also break some websites, but for the particular websites you're visiting, that can be effective. And the third level is your really aggressive opponents. So we're now talking nation states, we're talking hackers, we're talking major corporations with significant interest. We're talking evil geniuses. We're talking Googles of the world, right? People who have access to all the information they need. People who may be very, very aggressive or very paranoid. And they can use advanced super cookies. They're going to be looking at history tracking. And these are the people who are going to be starting to look at browser fingerprints. And as I said, this is starting to move sort of down the hierarchy. It used to be only the most sophisticated were using browser fingerprints. But like I said, we're now seeing mainstream advertisers on the internet beginning to use the browser and canvas fingerprinting to do re-cookieing and reacquiring of people. And in the face of this, you really need to be starting to think carefully about how you interact with those websites or any of those entities who have that kind of ability to track you, because without great care, it's quite easy for them to continue to identify you and extract that behavioral information from which they're going to learn all those secrets that you're trying to protect. So in this case, you want to be doing a good job of really hiding in the dark from them. So just using a non-associated IP address that you use frequently, like the Starbucks down the hall or in the bottom floor of your building, isn't going to cut it anymore. You really need to make sure that those IP addresses are totally unassociated. In fact, for a lot of big users, they may be in a company town. Just being within a mile of their headquarters may be a giveaway. You may need to move very far away. And that's where VPN services and privacy services really come in, where you can project the IP address that you're using to the other side of the country, if not the other side of the world, and mix it with a huge number of other people. So that IP just cannot be attributed back to you with any confidence whatsoever. At this point, you're probably also going to start wanting to look at virtualization, because these really strong super cookies are hard to remove. You may not be easily able to find them, get them out of your system. They could even be trying to use some sort of a malware or a Trojan or other tools that will de-anonymize you, even if you're using a VPN of some sort. So with a VM, you can use it for a given session and then roll back to a known good, clean state. And that prevents any malware, any trackers from sticking around, because you're absolutely destroying all of that and going back to where you were when you were fresh. As well, that can reduce your browser fingerprint, because you don't have that whole history of extra plugins. So you're going to want to use in that VM a clean operating install and as clean a browser as you can manage, maybe just with some security plugins to help protect yourself and manage active content, but nothing else. You want to be as vanilla as you can possibly be, so that it increases the likelihood of many more other people sharing the same fingerprint that you're having in your virtual browser. And you may want to start thinking about specialty tools at this point, because human error is where this falls down, and that's what's going to blow you up. And so let's look at the two main failure modes, and they're pretty straightforward. The first is, if your system's off by default, you'll forget to turn it on. Right? You're doing your ordinary surfing, and then you're going to go research your competitor, and about halfway through reading white papers on their website, you're like, I forgot to turn on private browsing mode. I forgot to turn on my VPN. I forgot I should have switched over to my virtual machine. And they've already got all that information. And we've even seen this with really experienced hackers. The Silk Road, the operators of the Silk Road were taken down because in the early days of the process, they weren't careful enough. They didn't always use their privacy tools. And so they'd have some visits with it turned on, some visits with it turned off. There was enough cross-correlation between the activities that they could attach real names to pseudonyms and track it all the way down the line. Now, the corollary is, if it's on by default and it's not easy to use, you'll turn it off. It'll get frustrating. You'll be annoyed that you went to some website and the video didn't play because you've got Flash turned off, or the system loaded slowly, or you're needing to log in again all the time. So making sure that the tools you've got really work with your workflow is critical, because as we've all seen with security tools, if it isn't user-friendly, if it isn't easy to use, people will bypass it. They'll just turn it off. So best practices here. You probably want to go with default on. As I said, make sure you keep it easy to use. I suggest using a virtual machine as a standard best practice, but only do it for the browser. If you put everything in the virtual machine, then if that ever gets compromised, then they can get all the rest of your data. So really more of a security argument than anything, but I like to keep my documents separate from the VM with my browser in it, because I don't trust browsers in general. Roll back after each use. Make sure that you're automatically turning on a privacy VPN from inside your VM every time you use it, so that it's not something that you need to remember to do. Most of the commercial ones, at least, are fast and effective. The free services like Tor, A, I don't trust them, and B, there's huge performance impacts from them. But the commercial ones are actually pretty fast and pretty manageable. And I recommend installing a password vault into that. Because once you start destroying your cookies, it's going to drive you nuts that you're needing to log in all the time. And if you're using good passwords that are hard to remember, like you should be, it's going to drive you insane unless you actually have a password vault installed into your browser so that you can automatically fill in and log into those websites really quickly. And it turns out once you've got that going, it's almost as good as having the Remember Me checked and all the cookies in place anyway. And that's one of those things that allows it to be less painful part of your ordinary process and prevents you getting frustrated and turning it off. So next steps. First thing I'd suggest doing, is thinking. Think about, what are you protecting? What kind of information do you have, secrets about your company that you don't want leaking to your competitors? Is it mergers and acquisition? Is it R&D? Is it litigation strategy? Is it, any of these things might need protecting? And focus on those, because if you try to protect everything, you're typically protecting nothing. Second, who are you protecting it against? How sophisticated are they? How hard are they likely to try to work against you? And make sure that you're instituting at least the appropriate levels of security for that. I suggest, start using the appropriate tools. Turn on the private browsing mode. Get yourself that VPN service. Surf off your iPad instead of your computer. And actually, interestingly, iPads and iPhones, even more than Android, get around the browser fingerprint problem because you can't install third-party plugins. So there's much less entropy with those than there are with typical computers. And then once you've got that going, you've decided what you need to protect, you've started taking the right actions, look into automating the whole process, because human error is the number one failure mode. That's how things break down. So if you can make this so that it happens seamlessly, you've got a secure virtual environment and that becomes your default browser and all the activity you do is in that area, that prevents you from accidentally tripping over your own feet and revealing information about your activities. So I'd like to open it up to questions now. There's a question section in the little control bar, and if anyone's got any, please go ahead, type them in. I'd be happy to answer them. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting for those to pop up, if you've got any questions you want to ask me directly, or you're looking for any more information, or you're just interested in what you're hearing, I am not anonymous in any way, shape, or form. There's lots of ways to find me. I invite you to email me, follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I've got 2 blogs that I write for. The Privacy blog, which is mostly focused on consumer issues, and I also blog for Ntrepid Corp, and that's mostly focused on more commercial and enterprise scale security and mostly security issues in that case. So the first person's asked, what do I think about the Anonymizer VPN service? I have to say I'm biased about the Anonymizer VPN service since I founded Anonymizer back in 1995. I think it's a great choice. It's fast. It's really easy to use. It's both Mac and Windows, and as a Mac user, that's really important to me. So, in terms of allowing you to displace your IP address, we have everyone coming out of basically the same couple of IP addresses in a given day, so we have maximum mixing. So it does the best job possible of hiding your source IP address when you're trying to go out there. So how can you configure a browser to hide the volume of data they usually send about video cards and so forth? That's kind of a catch-22, because if you configure your browser to hide the information that every other browser in the world sends, that itself is an enormous signal, is really unusual, and is a fantastic tracking mechanism. I used to do a presentation where one of my slides was a picture of a ninja walking through a large crowd on the street. And the problem here is that even though no one knows who the ninja is, everyone's going to pay a whole lot of attention because this guy's gone out of his way to try to hide his identity. It attracts focus. So the key really is you can't not give a signal, but you can try to give the most generic possible signal. So using a brand new install, look like a fresh out of the box computer, or like I said, using mobile devices with no plugins. And particularly, like I said, the Apple ones are nice for that because they don't let you do any plugins. They're always going to be really quite vanilla. And of course, they also make it very easy then to use 3G data and get your IP address from AT&T or Verizon or whoever, rather than from your local network, your work. Just make sure you turn off Wi-Fi if you're doing that. What privacy programs do I recommend? Well, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this particular issue, and this is actually one of the thought processes that went into our new secure browser platform, Passages. So the main purpose of Passages was to protect against malware, because browsers are Swiss cheese, and make sure that the malware couldn't attack your system. But while we were at it, we also leveraged our experience with Anonymizer and other non-attribution tools we'd built to make sure that you couldn't be tracked. And we did that primarily to prevent targeted attacks, because we're seeing all kinds of things with websites being attacked by hackers. And they, rather than attacking everyone who comes to the watering hole, they're only attacking people of particular interest, because that makes it less likely that the malware gets discovered. If a company like McAfee or Symantec comes and visits the website, they won't see anything because the attack won't happen because they're not the target group. And so all of those kind of automated alert systems don't go off. But as a side effect of that, we're hiding the user's identity, we're scrubbing trackers. Every time you shut it down, we're burning the whole environment to the ground. So it actually automates a lot of these kinds of tools. So obviously, I'm a big fan of our own tool, and really we built it because, especially against this kind of threat, I'm not seeing other tools that do it. Things like Tor, the Onion router, try to protect against this kind of attack. They've got things to manage identity. Obviously, it hides your IP address, but I'm just not comfortable with their security model, because anyone can run an exit node. And it's just too easy to launch attacks through that. And in fact, there's a lot of history of that kind of attack happening. So someone asking about a feature on Chromebooks called Power Wash that removes all of the cookies and traces of history. I actually haven't researched that. It seems to me that Chromebooks would likely be better than your average operating system, Mac or Windows, just because of the way it runs. It's sort of running as a thin client, so much is cloud stored that it would be probably easier to delete all of that kind of content. But I'd actually need to make a study of that. That's a great suggestion, actually. I love that idea. So what I'll do is I'll probably go off, see if I can do some research, and if I find anything interesting, I'll definitely do a blog post about that. What do I think about using multiple browsers, multiple computers simultaneously, so that you've got one for browsing activity and one for your normal work? I think that obviously can be very effective, and that's really what we see in the government, where you have classified environments and you need to have air gapping, and people will have multiple computers with separate monitors, or maybe an A/B switch for switching back and forth between the monitors. That is clearly the gold standard of how to do it. It's also unacceptably cumbersome and expensive for most users. So my guess is that, if your security model requires that level of protection, that's definitely the way to do it. But I think for most people, if you're looking at that sort of hierarchy of threats, it's probably overkill for what most people need compared to the inconvenience of doing it. Unless you happen to have that set up there and it's easy to manage for you. But most people are not that technical. And just trying to get them to remember where to do what can be really complicated. If you're the kind of person who likes that sort of setup, really effective. But overall, I think my recommendation, especially if you were trying to deploy this across an entire company and protect an entire organization, is to just keep it as simple as possible if you can. Can Firefox be coaxed into sending less information? It's interesting. The way you get the information out of Firefox is using JavaScript and Flash. And it's hard to stop it because it's looking up things like screen size and what fonts are supported and what plugins are there, because many of these software need to be able to interact with those. They need to know that kind of information about your browser. So if you try to stop sending it, it actually breaks a lot of things on the internet. You probably could shut it down, but you do get this functionality issue. So our approach has been to go with a totally vanilla image, and that's what Passages does. All Passages users look exactly the same. And then you've got this large population of people with the same exact fingerprint, so it's impossible to know which one of them at which organization could have been doing things. But I imagine it would be possible to actually prevent Firefox from doing it. It's not something we looked at, again, because of that signature problem, that when you start making the browser behave strangely, that itself can be very visible and leave its own fingerprint, and is probably even more rare than the configuration of particular plugins that you have. When is Passages coming out? Thank you for asking. Try not to turn these into product pitches, but Passages is already available for enterprise and businesses, and we wanted to roll it out to them just to make sure that we could manage the process more carefully. We absolutely are planning to launch for consumers as soon as we feel that we can provide the kind of experience that you want. You know, we certainly don't want to look like Twitter in the early days and be flying the fail whale every time we get overwhelmed. Our guess is that it's going to be in early 2016. But you know, we'll definitely be, if you follow our newsletter or you follow me on the blogs, we'll be putting out more information as we get more confidence on the exact date that we'll be making this broadly available. But again, if you're looking this for businesses, 10 users or more, that's available right now. Running a browser in a virtual machine, isn't that a lot of work? It's actually become not so bad. So on the Mac, if you've got something like Parallels or VMware Fusion, or on a Windows machine with VirtualBox, it's pretty easy just to have a browser running in a separate virtual machine window on your desktop. And in fact, you can snapshot it. So as soon as you set it up and configure it, you capture a snapshot, and then, you know, at the end of the day or each morning, you go in and reset it. It is a power user thing. So your average user is probably not going to want to be doing that. Again, it's why we built this as a product. That, you know, it's certainly possible. All of these things can be done by a sufficiently experienced person, but you know, it really comes into that frustration. You're either going to fail to turn it on because it's annoying, or turn it off because it's annoying. It's not that hard, and the tools are out there, and someone with some experience can do it. But you know, maintaining the operational security discipline with the manual process is hard, and that's why I focus on automating. So if you could write a script that would automatically revert it every day, you know, for example, that would make things easier for you. And these tools tend to be scriptable, so you could do that. But again, more of a power user feature than sort of an average user feature. Are SSL certificates for browsers sufficient enough? And they certainly provide content security, but in this case, you're visiting the website that's gathering information about you. So that website could be secure. You know, you could be using all the end-to-end security you want. You are intentionally telling that website about who you are and what you're doing. And so, you know, the SSL process actually just gives them even more confidence in their identification. You know, if you have an SSL browser certificate, now you're giving them, you know, ironclad information about who you are. So you know, that's fantastic for the security side of the equation, but actually it's really counterproductive to the passive information leakage side of the security equation. And hopefully I'm answering the question that you meant to ask. So when will the secure browser be available? I already answered that. Someone's asking, will Anonymizer be incorporated in it? Yes, so the VPN that we have terminates into our cloud infrastructure, and Anonymizer is part of Ntrepid. So we were able to, in fact, mix our Passages customers with our Anonymizer users. So that gives you this very large population of other users and really improves the anonymity and the mixing, making it even more difficult to try to untangle who might be coming in at any given moment. So how much information can a website gather before they violate privacy laws? That's a really interesting question. To some extent, they probably are already telling you that they're gathering personally identifiable information, right? Most websites will disclose that they are tracking your IP address, and that if you fill out information on the website, that they will capture that. And they'll often say that we keep logs. This is now just doing analytics on the information that they've already told you they're capturing. I suspect that this is a real legal gray area, but at the moment, my guess is there's almost no protection whatsoever, and that these people could reverse engineer pretty much anything they want about you from watching your behaviors, as long as they're not doing anything that isn't within the scope of what they say they're doing. I think things like browser fingerprinting may be an interesting case. I don't know of any case law around it, but we may see law or case law evolving to cover these issues. But right now, it feels like quite the Wild West to me. So someone's asking what is passages, and I realized I was trying to do this talk without getting into any details about our particular products, but I guess now that we're in the question and answer phase, Passages is a secure virtualized browser. So what we're doing is we're taking a standard browser, currently Firefox, will be supporting Chrome soon, putting it in a virtual machine that runs on the user's desktop, uh, and then it automatically opens a VPN out to the anonymizer cloud, and all the traffic flows over that. So nothing that comes into the browser can go to the local machine. It doesn't mount any folders, and it can't try to scan anything on the local network because the VPN is the only data path in and out. As soon as you close your last window, we burn it to the ground. So we're getting rid of any malware, any trackers, any cookies, right? So you've got 100% elimination of that. You're using our IP address, so we're hiding the IP. And then we've automated the process so you can make it your default browser. So you click on the link in your email, it'll open up, it'll fire off Passages, launch the virtual machine, and make the connection. So it's pretty transparent to the user. And really, it was the result of all the thinking that was in this talk. And after analyzing that, and some other threats that actually was the subject of the last webinar I gave, all of that kind of analysis that we did went into the design of the Passages product to make it easy and user friendly. Because right, if it's not easy, if it's not user friendly, people won't do it. What do I recommend for cookie cleaners? I really feel like this is kind of a cat and mouse game. I mean, there's a lot of commercial cookie cleaners. I'm not sure I trust them to get the latest generation, especially because of the recookieing through browser fingerprinting. I'm just not convinced that I trust any of them much beyond what you get with just the incognito mode in your conventional browser. So my feeling is it's kind of a half step that's not necessarily worth taking. I would generally go from incognito mode, and the next step I'd take would be the VM that I can roll back, because you have total confidence then, right? You know that everything's gone because you had a fresh install of the operating system, and everything that happened after that has disappeared and you're back to that fresh install. You can have total confidence that there's no malware that's managed to survive that process, and no super cookies and no browser flash objects or any of those other ways that people will try to track your browser over time. Costing, someone's asking what the cost of Passages is. Um, that is on our website. So if you go to intrepidcorp.com, we've got the we've got a couple of different levels of the product, and all the pricing information is right there front and center. Once you're infected with malware, best way to get rid of it, if it's simple malware, you might just try using the anti-malware systems. But frankly, there's so much malware now that is polymorphic and changes itself and changes its signatures. I think you really cannot trust the tool, especially a tool running on the infected machine, to remove malware effectively. What I've seen best practices out there in the corporate world is if you think there's malware on a machine, you reimage it from scratch and then put just the data back on it. And you're real careful about the files you put back on it to make sure that they're not carrying some sort of an exploit that's going to reinfect you. But I think there's nothing that you can really trust to remove malware from an existing service. And that's exactly what we've done. We actually spend very little time thinking about detection in general. Within the virtual environment, we just burn it to the ground automatically. And if you want to move a file to your local machine, then we bring a whole array of scanners to bear on that file, using many different kinds of scanning technologies to make sure that we can find and eliminate any malware in those things that you intentionally choose to move to your local machine. So no drive-bys, no exploits, but you said you wanted this file. We still want to check the heck out of it before it gets to you. But once an infection's happened, it's really, these things can dig in deep and entrench themselves. So finding them before they install is one thing. Once they've taken root, I think you really need to pull the entire plant out by the root stem and everything, and go back to a clean install. All right, well, I see we've hit our hour now. I really appreciate all your great questions. I love the interaction, and I'd love to continue it. So please absolutely reach out to me by email, follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and on the blogs. I'd love to hear more from you. If you've got any thoughts on future talks or topics, that would be fantastic as well. And thank you so much for attending this webinar and for your interest in our company. Have a good day.